first, what I'd like to do is I would like to take everyone out to the live binder before we start. I see we have a few more people coming in, so we'll just spend a little time here making sure everyone knows where information can be found. So, on our live binder here, I'm under the Navigating Special Ed Maze session. And what you'll see here is, and the one thing I want to talk about first is just to let everyone know who I am and what I do. So my name is Cheri Sylla. And as Tricia said, I'm the Family Engagement Coaching Coordinator. I work statewide throughout the state of Wisconsin for the WSPEI project, and WSPEI stands for Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. I have the WSPEI website up on the screen here, and WSPEI, as it says, is a resource for families throughout the state of Wisconsin. So if we go to About WSPEI, WSPEI is all about partnerships, and our mission is really to develop strong relationships and build effective partnerships between families and school staff across the state. And we support families in a variety of ways. So each one of our CISA coordinators, and we have coordinators in almost all 12 CISAs around the state. So regionally, there's someone like me in just about every part of the state. We're here to help families navigate the special education system. So helping families understand rights and responsibilities, understand what resources, organizations, and support agencies are available to them. We help families learn about the special education system by providing workshops and trainings and those types of things. We also train families to serve in advisory roles and things like that beyond their own child, beyond helping their child. We also are in place to help educators. Oftentimes educators, when they go to college to become a teacher, they get one course on family engagement. And most teachers become teachers because they want to teach children, but every child comes with a family member. And so part of our job in the WSPEI project is to help educators better work with families, and specifically our grant is focused in special education. So we do family engagement planning with school districts. We do professional learning opportunities for educators, and all for the purpose, again, of building strong relationships so that partnerships are created between school staff and families. So as I said, we have WSPEI coordinators throughout the state. So if you'd like to contact someone in your region of the state, you hit contact at the top, and there's a nice little map here. I'm located in the CISA 1 area, so that's down in southeastern Wisconsin. But we have people throughout the state of Wisconsin. So depending upon where you live, I know someone said they're in the River Falls area. Debbie Brennan, Debbie left our grant last year, but we do have other staff that are covering in the CISA 11 area. But just know that there are people who are available to help families navigate the system, as well as to help educators work with families. We do have a 1-8333, a toll-free number, 879-7734. That phone number is our help desk. So that's our first line of assistance to families throughout the state as well. And then you'll notice there's plenty of resources out here, IEP resources that you'll see. We have videos, things on communication, and then the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, because our grant is funded by DPI out of Madison. And so we are linked back into the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction as well. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was familiar with my grant and where I come from. I should also mention to everyone, I am the parent of 4 adult sons. And so my son, who has an intellectual disability and epilepsy, brought me into the world of special education when he was 3 years old, and brought me into the disability world when he was 10 months old, when he had his first seizure that lasted over an hour. So I've had many years of experience, and to this day, I still am and always will be his mom, and helping him to navigate the adult world as well. So the other things in our binder here, you'll see that we have the, I don't know why nothing is coming up here. Maybe my internet's a little slow. The student snapshots are some resources in here. The About Me is another resource. We have communication options, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. Those are found in here. Legal requirements for accessible educational materials. So this is a DPI bulletin. DPI puts forth guidance to school districts as to how they should handle things, specific topics and items in special education. And this one that's in here specifically talks about accessible educational materials. I also have the link to the DPI bulletin 11.01 that talks about statewide services provided by Wisconsin Educational Service Programs for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, as well as the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I have an information bulletin on extended school year. So I know last year when we did this, I think extended school year came up as a topic. And so I've kept this in here as a bulletin and as information for families, just so you have that. Extended school year typically is something that is provided if it is determined by the IEP team to be needed by the student, typically over the summer. And that is something that needs to happen at an IEP meeting and discussed by members of the IEP in regard to the child perhaps needing extended school year for specific goal areas. So that bulletin is in here for informational purposes. And then the top 10 resources for families from that I'll talk about at the end are some of the resources that when I'm working with families and as I've helped families troubleshoot their particular issues or concerns when they've called and asked for help and assistance, these are typically the top 10 resources that I have shared with families to help them navigate their particular situation. So with that being said, we're gonna pop into the presentation. All right, so I'm gonna go to the slideshow. And Trish, are you able to confirm that the PowerPoint is showing?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about navigating special education resources. And as Trish had said, in the past, we've normally provided individuals that were participating in this training. If you can see my picture on the screen, we used to give out this blue parent record file folder. And we used to have it chock full of information as I went through this presentation. And so this is what Trish was talking about, that as I go through the presentation, if there are items that you would like to have copies of. Many of these things are available in hard copy. Or if you'd like the Blue Parent Record File folder for organizing your child's IEP related, school related items, just let us know, because that's something I can send to Trish, and then Trish can send it out to you. Okay. So that's what we're going to go through today. And so this is going to provide you with an overview of the special education system. I'm hoping once we've gone through all the resources and information, that at the end we'll field general questions. But along the way, if you have specific questions about the resource or a question that relates to the resource, maybe a situation or things like that, please ask a question, whether you use the chat, because I'll try to watch the chat, and I know Trish will watch the chat as well. Or if you'd like to, just interject and ask a question, that's great too. All right. So our session learning outcomes for today are to build awareness of those key resources to use and share with families. We're going to demonstrate the use of resources and organizational tools. And I'm hoping that we'll share ideas and learn from one another as well. So this particular slide here, every child a graduate, college and career ready. This is something that the Department of Public Instruction, probably about, 7, 8 years ago, identified as their mission, okay? Every child a graduate, college and career ready. And even though it says college and career ready, it's actually college, career, and community ready, because not all of our kids are necessarily going to be college bound. My son certainly wasn't. Career bound, my child does, or my son, my 31-year-old, has a part-time job and has worked at that job for 10 years, part-time. And so I consider that a career. It's in retail, and he's been able to sustain it over this 10-year period of time. But there are some families that I know, and some young adults, that college or career isn't necessarily an option for them, but being active in the community is. And so as we're talking today, and as you're thinking about your child, or if you're an educator, the children that you do work with, helping their families think about the future and where their child may be once they become an adult is, while it's kind of scary and overwhelming, especially if you have a small child, it's something that we really need to keep in mind. And plenty of parents along the way that blaze the trail, that were working ahead of me because their sons or daughters were older than my son, helped me see early on that while I'm living in the here and now, because that's sometimes all that we can do as parents, every once in a while, it's helpful to think about what the future might bring for our son or daughter with a disability. DPI has 5 focus areas based on their mission of educational equity, where every student has what they need to learn when they need it. And that includes students with disabilities. So the 5 areas that they look at are effective instruction, school and instructional leadership, meaningful relationships with students, safe and supported students, and then that 5th one is family and community engagement. We know families are the one consistent piece or element in a child's life. Is their parent, their grandparent, whoever is that those, maybe sometimes it's more than one person, but it's an adult who's there to support that child throughout their K-12 education. And educators come and go from year to year. And so that's why family and community engagement became a corner piece in one of the 5 focus areas. Now, that's in general for all kids. Now let's talk about CCR IEPs, college and career ready IEPs. They also have 5 beliefs. Number 1, we have high expectations for all children with disabilities. Your disability, the child's disability, is only one factor in who that individual child is. And we need to have high expectations for each and every one of our children. Culturally responsive practices, that means we need to take into consideration the family's way of life. Not every family is the same. And so being responsive to the different types of families that are out there, the belief systems of families, their cultural underpinnings, those types of things are really important when we're developing an IEP and providing an educational opportunity for a student with a disability. Student relationships is the third one. And student relationships, not only do we talk about our students with disabilities having relationships with students without disabilities, but we also talk about those student relationships, meaning students having relationships with other caring adults, teachers, and other staff in the school. So that's what the student relationships are about, because sometimes the teacher that's working with the child may not have the strongest relationship with that child. And sometimes the relationship or the relationship is strained. And sometimes that causes problems. And oftentimes I ask the question of parents when I'm helping them through an issue or a problem. If it's with a staff member, I always ask the question, who else does your child trust? Does your child have a relationship with? Because oftentimes that may be a way to work through some problems and issues. Number 4, family and community engagement. Again, just like under the 5 focus areas of all families, college and career ready IEPs, when we develop those IEPs and we talk about special education, IDEA, the law for special education, specifically says parents are part of the IEP team. Parents have a role as part of an IEP team. Parents have a say. You can contribute. You have an opinion to share. Now, that doesn't always mean the school will abide by what you say, but we have the ability to impact the decisions that are made on behalf of our children. And then the 5th one is collective responsibility. And this one is huge because this speaks specifically to the fact that just because your son or daughter has a disability and an IEP doesn't mean the only staff that work with your child or whose responsibility it is for your child to learn is the special ed staff, whether it's the speech and language, OT, PT, special ed teacher. They're not the only ones responsible for our kids' learning. It's all teachers in the building. So no matter what grade level your child is at, general ed teachers, regular ed teachers, other staff in the building have a responsibility to help your child move and make progress through their K-12 education. All right. So with that being said, I have a video here, and this video is that introduction to special education. What it does provide is, and I'm gonna just make sure that I'm gonna go back into my share to, yeah, I did share this out. Wasn't sure if I had clicked that or not. So I'd like to share this video. And this can be used with all families. Every time I listen to it, I'm reminded again of some of those basic steps and things that I always have to keep in the front of my mind when I'm working with families. So we're gonna take some time to watch this, and then we're gonna jump into the resources in regard to special education.
Some children who are having problems in school may need extra help through special education. Special education is for children who have a disability. If your child has a disability, special education can help your child learn. We work with one child at a time, your child. This program is an introduction to special education for you and your child, and is brought to you by the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative and the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Special education means instruction that is specially designed to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. Special education means adapting what a child learns and how he or she learns it. Federal laws require public schools to give special education to children who need it. Your local school district can help you find the most effective educational options for your child. We'd like to show you how the special education process works. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, states that all children with disabilities must receive a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. This means that special education is provided at no cost to families. What is appropriate for one child will likely be different than what is appropriate for others, and special education meets the unique needs of each child. All services are delivered with the intent of helping you to prepare your child for further education, employment, and independent living. Special education is not just a curriculum, but a process of determining what is appropriate for your child and then providing it in the most meaningful way. This is what makes special education individualized for each child. Special education is a 5-step process, beginning with referral. You may already know or suspect that your child may need special education services. A referral may come from parents or guardians like yourself, medical professionals, teachers, or someone from the school district itself. Schools often identify preschool children with special needs through early community screenings. Anyone who cares about the child can make a referral for special education. You as a parent can send a referral letter to the school district's special education director or principal. Include the date, the specific phrase, "This is a referral for special education," your child's first and last name, their birth date, and a brief explanation of why you believe special education may be needed for your child. The second step is evaluating whether your child qualifies for special education. Existing information may be enough for you and the school to make that determination. You may be asked to share information about your child. Tests may be conducted, or your child may be observed to get a complete picture. You must be notified about any tests in writing, and your permission must be given before they are done. The third step is the IEP team meeting, or series of meetings, to discuss the evaluation and make recommendations for placement. You are an important team member. Your attendance is crucial because you are an expert about your child. You have the right to ask that this meeting be held at a time when you are able to attend. As an equal partner on the team, you're encouraged to actively participate, voice concerns, and ask questions. At the IEP team meeting, any results of tests will be shared, and your child's strengths and needs will be discussed. If it is decided that your child is eligible for special education, the team will provide an evaluation report and prepare a written plan. You may need more time to read the report and talk with others before you feel comfortable with your child's evaluation or writing the educational plan, called the IEP. This is normal. Ask the school personnel to wait or set up another meeting until you are ready for the next step. We will talk about the IEP in more detail later in the video. The fourth step in the process is placement, based on your child's IEP and taking into account what your child should be learning. The setting with the most appropriate special education and related services is called the Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE. A child with a disability will ideally attend the same school as children without disabilities. Sometimes this isn't appropriate, but the team will strive for the least restrictive environment as close as possible to home. After the IEP meeting, you will be asked to sign consent before your child receives special education for the first time. All school staff must follow the IEP. Throughout the year, You will receive reports from the school about your child's progress towards his or her IEP goals. However, your child's teachers will also want to communicate with you along the way. Be available and stay involved. This is a good way to share daily concerns, stay informed, and build positive relationships with the people who care for your child every day. The final step is an ongoing one, the annual review. Your child's IEP will be reviewed yearly to determine if services are appropriate, if the goals are being reached or should be changed, and if any additional needs have occurred. This ensures that your child is receiving the best possible combination of services to help him or her achieve their personal best. In addition, each special education student is reevaluated for eligibility at least once every 3 years, unless you and the school agree not to hold an evaluation. The school district has 15 business days after receiving a referral to send a request for your signed consent to evaluate your child. After you send the school your written permission, the school has 60 calendar days to complete the evaluation and hold an IEP team meeting to determine if the child is eligible for special education services. After that, the school has an additional 30 days in which to complete an IEP and offer placement. You will receive plenty of information about this process. It is a good idea to start a file to contain the paperwork. The Individualized Education Program, or IEP, is the heart of your child's special education. A team of many concerned people will participate in your child's IEP. This is called the IEP team and includes a local educational agency representative, or LEA. This is usually a school district professional who has the authority to say what the school can provide to your child. This person might be a principal or school psychologist. Other people on the team are you, your child's regular education teacher, a special education teacher, and other people invited by you or the school who care about your child or have special expertise. Your child, if 14 years of age, must be invited. The purpose of the IEP team is to evaluate your child for eligibility for special education, determine your child's educational needs, recommend placement, and review the IEP to ensure that present and future needs are met. Classes and related services beyond the normal school year may be recommended by the IEP team. This is not summer school and may have a more flexible and varied schedule. These services are considered if the child may lose skills when school is out, or when emerging skills, behavior, or physical problems need to be addressed throughout the summer or other school vacation time. These services will be written in the IEP. Sometimes you may not agree with other members of the IEP team. The good news is there is a plan for resolving your differences. Informal means of resolution include discussing your concerns with the individual staff or even writing a letter to the school. You may request another IEP team meeting, and you may ask for a trained facilitator who does not work for the school. Mediation is also available and often helps both parties find solutions. You also have a right to formally disagree by requesting a due process hearing before a judge. If you think the school has not followed special education laws, you may file a complaint to the State Department of Public Instruction. All children deserve an educational program which helps them to become the best that they can be. Remember, you are a full and equal partner through the entire special education process. Be sure you know your rights in the special education process and the people with whom you can work with to best meet your child's needs. As an expert about your child, your input and participation is crucial to your child's success in school. Together, we can make it happen, one child at a time. For more information, please contact your local school district, Cooperative Educational Service Agency, the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative, or other parent advocacy groups, such as Wisconsin Facets, to assist you with any questions you may have. Some children who are having
All right, so that was our video. That was that introduction to special education. And it had lots of acronyms in there, lots of special education jargon. And one piece of feedback I get from families is, oh my gosh, why can they not, why does education have to have all these words, all this jargon? And like going to any country, I kind of liken it to while we didn't want to intentionally go to the world of special education, we're here, whether we like it or not as parents. And it's up to us. It's really important that we as parents understand and make an attempt to understand the language of special education. So it's like learning any type of language if you go to another country. But there are things, resources and tips that we'll talk about going forward that will hopefully help you to better navigate and communicate with school staff in regard to special educational needs in regard to your child. So this slide here talks about that blue parent record file. So that's this file folder here that I had talked about. So as a parent, I had a 3-ring binder early on, and then I found myself getting another 3-ring binder because I kept everything from my son Eric's educational journey from the time he was 3 all the way through 21, because students with disabilities are able to stay in school until they're 21 years old. So I had plenty of binders. And I started this job in 2003 at the time when Eric was 12 years old. No, 13. He was 13 at that time. So he was in middle school already. And that's when I was introduced to this file folder. And this file folder is really, really nice. So as it says, it's a way for organizing materials that a parent can bring to the IEP meeting. I find this a lot easier to bring to an IEP meeting and set in front of me as I'm meeting with school staff than to take those binders that I used to have. And then I also have cabinets, file cabinets with everything in them. And then this folder also has 7 dividers. And so these dividers, each one of these dividers has information on it, which is really, really nice because when these were developed, it pulled out specific information that parents either needed to think about, to keep in that section, or to know about, okay? So each one of these sections does have information on each one of the tabs and the dividers. And it's just a really nice place to collect information to keep for ongoing record keeping. So when I started 18 years ago, when my son was 13, I used this every year. I would fill it up. And at the end of the year, I would just go through and pull out those things that I needed to keep. And those went into my file cabinet or 3-ring binder. But I found myself actually keeping less information as time went on. Maybe it was because he was older and I was getting more accustomed and smarter to how I was organizing and keeping information for my son. Maybe it was with electronic folders and email that I didn't have as much printed material, but I found myself actually being much more productive and organized as a result of it. So if you'd like one of these folders, just let Trish know, and we can certainly provide those to Trish and have those sent out. All right, so now we're going to get going and move into the different sections. So we're going to start with in front of the file. So in front of the file, there's a WSPEI brochure. I already took you out to the WSPEI website. So if you want a brochure and check it out, you certainly could. I'm going to go to the second item though, the Special Education Procedural Safeguards booklet. Okay. So what you should see on your screen now is Special Education Procedural Safeguards, Rights for Parents and Children. So this is known as your Parents' Rights Brochure. It typically comes in, let me pull this out. We have it available in a little book like this, a 5x7. We also have it available where it can be printed off the DPI website. So some school districts have 8.5 by 11 printed copies that are stapled together. But this is really, really important because this needs to be provided to you once a year. And lots of school districts typically do it at the beginning of the school year. They send it out to all families right off the bat, or they may choose to send it to you with your invitation to your son or daughter's IEP meeting. But it must be provided once a year, which is good that it's only once a year, because it used to be, before things changed, it used to be that one of these procedural safeguard booklets had to be sent out in advance or with the invitation of every meeting held for that student during the year. So at one time, I was actually collecting a lot of those. And what is the name of the blue folder again? It's the parent record file, just so that people know that. So I was just checking the chat there. So the procedural safeguards, this information in here, and I'm gonna just page down so you can see what's in here. The communication options is in the front. That is something we'll talk about a little bit more. So in a couple of slides, but just know that in here, this tells you what you can do as a parent if you have questions or disagree with a decision of the school. So it tells you what you can do when questions or concerns arise, what you can do at a meeting, how do you resolve those things. And then in the middle here, it talks about facilitated IEPs and mediation and those types of things that were identified in that video that we just took a look at. The third page, actually a school district could personalize this and customize it to your child, to fill in your child's name, and then fill this in as to who should you call, who's the special ed teacher, regular ed teacher, school psych, that type of thing. So that's all in here. But let's go to the procedural safeguards here. So this is your rights as far as when it comes to special education and IDEA. So your school district, when must they give prior written notice? So it tells you when the school district has to tell you ahead of time when they're doing something. There's information in here if you speak a different language that they need to provide information in the parent's language. There's definitions, parental consent, what that means. There's also information in here as we go a little bit further down, confidentiality of information. So student confidentiality not only applies to general ed, but special ed students as well. And so there's guidelines in regard to confidentiality of information and student records. There's also information about state complaints. So in the video, if you wanted to file a complaint, it talks about that. It talks about due process. So if you have a due process complaint, it talks about hearings on due process complaints. It talks about appeals. So as you can see, this is very procedural, very law linked. It also talks about procedures when disciplining children with disabilities. So there's information about what the law says. So this is very legal, but it's something that parents need to be aware of. And typically a parent isn't fully aware of this until something happens with their child. And then I've spent quite a bit of time explaining parents' rights and what their next steps are in regard to whatever the situation is. So just know that your parents' rights brochure is in here. and that's in the front. The other thing that was really evident in that video is the use of acronyms. So we have an acronym list. And so what you should see on the screen now is the website at the Department of Public Instruction in Madison. And the webpage is frequently used education acronyms and terms used in special education. And so you can go through and they'll give the acronym and they'll give the correct name for that. And in some instances, they'll even give a little definition as to what that item is. So one thing I have found in working with families is that school districts throughout our state have their own set of acronyms. So one tip that's really important for parents to know about is, number one, always ask your school district, do they have their own acronym list that they could share with you so that you don't have to stop people in the middle of a meeting and say, could you tell me what that meant? Because I've never heard that acronym before. And some families feel very uncomfortable and don't want to stop people when they're talking and they're using acronyms. But I'm a firm believer that the only way we're going to be able to truly understand what information is being shared with us is if we stop and ask questions. And that it's okay for us to do that. And very rarely have I heard from a family member where they have said, well, I stopped and asked a question and the staff member, treated me poorly, or I could tell by their nonverbal, they didn't appreciate that I stopped. I don't hear that very often. If anything, educators appreciate knowing and being stopped, because once you're used to a language and jargon, things just flow off the tip of your tongue and you don't even realize oftentimes that you're using acronyms or jargon that others in the room may not understand. So I encourage families to always ask questions if you don't understand something. So that's the front of our file. Oops, I jumped ahead a little bit. Okay, so the next the very first divider in here, we start with birth to 3, okay? So in birth to 3, you'll see this nice little divider, and this divider talks about the number one point in here, not only does it give information about what birth to 3 is, but more so, it talks about being a full decision-making member of the IFSP team, so the Individualized Family Support Program team. And then it talks about what active participation means. So this folder is not only for individuals that have children with IEPs in our K-12 system, but also it's for IFSPs, so families that have children in preschool or are in birth to 3 programs. So what I have in here, this section is the birth to 3 program brochure. And this is a nice little brochure from the Department of Health Services that talks about the Wisconsin birth to 3 program. And so there's information in here that can be shared with families or referenced. We also have Families Are the Foundation. These are DHS brochures. And I am going to on this. And this brochure is another brochure that talks about the birth to 3 program. And they talk about who is eligible to receive birth to 3 services, what it is, how are families' rights protected, how does the birth to 3 program support families and children. So more information again in regard to birth to 3. One of my favorite brochures And these, so this is a brochure, a little brochure on the developmental milestones. So it comes as this little trifold brochure. So this is from the CDC, and I love this because it really does talk about what the child's journey looks like and what the milestones along the way are. But one of the other resources that I don't have linked in here, but is one of my favorites, is the CDC puts out these little booklets. And this is also the Weisman Center and the Wisconsin Regional Centers, Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs Network. But the milestone moments are just super great. So this little booklet goes through your baby at 2 months, and it talks about social, emotional, language communication, and cognitive learning, and where they're at 2 months. And then it gives tips for families. How can you help your baby's development? So it goes through that. So all the way up to 5 years. So at 5 years, which I think is really cool, you know, we talk about social, emotional. They want to please friends. They want to be like friends. They're more likely to agree with rules. Well, that's not always true with 5-year-olds, but is aware of gender, that type of thing. Language and communication, they typically speak pretty clearly. They tell a simple story. And then how can you help your child's development? And then it talks about cognitive and movement and physical development as well. So this is really kind of a cool booklet. And this is something that I know some of our school districts have given out. I find this to be really helpful too when we're talking about IEPs. And because oftentimes our children with disabilities may not be functioning at grade level or at developmental level because of their disability. My son was one of those that at the age of 3, when he had his first evaluation, because while I asked people for help, doctors and others, my doctors, including a neurologist and my pediatrician, never ever told me that there was birth to 3 services. And it wasn't until my twins were born prematurely that a county nurse, who I asked her about my almost 3-year-old son, who was having seizures and just wasn't talking and stuff like that. She is the one who finally got us connected with our school district. And my son had his first evaluation at the age of 3. And at the age of 3, that is when we found out that many of his skills and where he was functioning at was at a 9-month level. That was devastating to my husband and I. But in the same sense, now that I think about this, it would have been nice had someone given me, you know, so he's at a 9-month level. What can I expect? And how can I help him? And I think back to that experience where there wasn't anything that people gave us and just pretty much just gave us the news and said, trust us, we'll work with him, we'll write an IEP. And that was that. Nowadays, when I'm working with families and I'm hearing their stories, they tell me that oftentimes birth to 3 staff and staff at schools are providing them information, which is helpful, which is good. I think things are in a better place than they were 28 years ago when my son was identified as having a disability. And it's information and resources such as the milestone moments from the CDC that can help families understand, well, if my child's here, where do they progress next? And developmentally, that I find helpful. Doesn't make the pain go away though, of understanding that your child is so far behind, but it gives us a sense of direction of where to go next. The other item that I have to share here is the transition roadmap. So this was developed there we go. by DPI, as well as a few of our family engagement coordinators through WSPEI. And so as little ones are 2.5 to 3 years old, they're beginning to make that transition from birth to 3 into into the early childhood program at their local school district. That there's a transition that occurs, right? And so this particular resource describes what that transition looks like. You start with a transition planning conference. There's a referral. You do the review of information. There oftentimes is additional assessment. Then you go to the evaluation meeting, the IEP meeting, notice of placement over here on the left, then over services begin, IEP review, and reevaluation. So it's kind of this winding journey, right? To get from point A, we're in birth to 3 programming, all the way to we have an IEP, we go through the annual IEP review, and then 3 years later, we do a reevaluation when if they enter at 3, by the time they turn 6, we're reevaluating. So that's kind of the journey that our colleagues at the Department of Public Instruction and some family engagement people put together. And then we have some resources here, different agencies, and some of the resources that I'm talking about today are also linked in here. So that's our section on birth to 3. Things to keep in this section, if you were to use this parent record file, would be your IFSP, your individual family service plan, any evaluation reports, and staff contact information. And then the next section, before I stop and ask if there's any questions or any comments, or if people want to share any ideas, we'll just talk a little bit about that preschool transition. So we moved from birth to 3, and now we're transitioning into preschool. So that's for 3 to 5 year olds. And in this section, we've got just a couple of resources in here. What I find most helpful is the Child Find brochure is a really nice brochure developed by the Department of Public Instruction and our Wisconsin collaborating partners. So it talks about what is Child Find, and Child Find is every school district in the state under IDEA is required to notify community members about if you suspect, if you as an individual suspect a child may have a disability, here is how you can look for support and to refer that child for a special education evaluation. So school districts are required to make sure they do this Child Find. What I really like about this particular brochure, though, is it does kind of lay out those milestones again. So sort of like the CDC brochure, except this is just, it highlights in a very simple brochure some things that we would be looking for little ones that are 3 years of age, 4 years, and 5 years. So this is the nice place that, or the nice information that talks about those milestones that I oftentimes share with families as well. So nice brochure with some good information. We also have the Act Early growth chart by the CDC. This I think is pretty cool too. I know my kids when they were growing up loved growth charts, and we actually had one that ended up getting ripped down and thrown out. I really wish I would have kept it. But when my twins were little, and one of our staff members at school gave a growth chart for both Brian and Kevin. And this one just goes up to 5 years, and you can, mark how tall your child is. But it also, again, tells you kind of some of the things that typical 5-year-olds might be doing, or 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds. And it goes all the way down to 2 to 18 months to a year. And what's cool about this is it's English and Spanish. So you have Spanish on the backside. So just another resource for families, and an opportunity that you can put pictures along the way too. So that's what's really cool. I kind of look at that as something that now I would have probably used something like that and kept it and put it in the box of things that I've kept for my boys over the years. And then finally, there is information that we have available through the Collaborating Partners website. And so through this, they've got a lot of information out here in regard to early childhood, but they also have information for families. So family and community engagement. They've got some resources and information for families out here. All right. So I am going to stop with, we've talked about knowing your rights and acronyms. We've talked about birth to 3 and preschool. Are there any questions, any comments, any thoughts? And Trisha, being our expert in preschool, having done this for years, Trish, do you have anything to add to this section?
One of the things, especially at this point in the family's life, is and having a child with a disability of any sort, they really have a fear of that placement. And I don't know if you could talk more about what the least restrictive placement would be, the least restrictive environment means for the preschool and the families that want to keep them in their daycare setting more than the early childhood program at the school. Do you ever get anything on that, Cheri?
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, that's a loaded question in some respects too, Trish. So one of the things.
Sorry about that.
No, because I find that our school districts across the state are at different places in their ability to service students in their natural environments, whether that's in the home, whether that's in a preschool or daycare, or whether that's in the early childhood classroom. And so one of the requirements of the IEP team and of the school is when you're having discussions about this preschool transition, especially from birth to 3 into early childhood education, our school districts are supposed to be considering not only the early childhood classroom that is set up within the school building, the actual building itself, but school districts are to look at where does that student spend their day right now? Are they home with mom or grandma? Can services be brought there? Because there is such a thing as itinerant services where school staff come to where the student is at, because we know from lots of experience and research that trying to limit the number of transitions a student has in their school day, in their regular day, makes for oftentimes a better day for that student, for that child. When parents are sitting at that IEP team meeting and the placement discussion comes up, school districts are required to document all of the different placements that have been considered. So if the child is in a daycare or preschool already, that needs to be considered. It all depends upon where that daycare or preschool happens to be. Is it within the boundaries of the school district, or does it sit outside the school district boundaries? We've had a number of cases in the last couple of years where a 3 to 5-year-old is attending a preschool or daycare that is outside the district boundaries. And so that has created a whole multitude of issues as far as what is the least restrictive environment and where should the child receive those services. So just know that parents have the right and have the ability to say, and I encourage families to express a preference for their child to not have to disrupt their day by having them come to the early childhood classroom at the school. That really school district personnel are supposed to be considering the natural environment in which that child is in during their day. Now, I will say there is some benefit depending upon the environment, thinking about the amount of services a student may need. So in some cases, if the student, depending upon what the services and needs of that student are, sometimes consideration to have those services provided in an early childhood classroom within the school building does make sense. I will say that it's very unique to every child and every situation, but in general, if your child is already in a preschool or daycare, the least restrictive environment as far as placement would be probably in all likelihood that preschool or daycare, and allowing the child to receive the services there. A lot of families also have a difficult time of taking time off from work, picking up their child to take them to early childhood or to take them to the school building for speech and language and bring them back. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question, Trish, but
Beautifully.
every situation is so different.
Another one that comes up quite often, more than I would ever hope, actually, is a family giving me a call of what their rights are or how they could handle a situation with their blind child in a classroom, a special ed classroom, with another child that has huge physical behaviors that can get out of control, and they get very scared because, you know, with their child that's not seeing something coming at them, to them, you know, the parents, their mind can just expand to the worst possible ability. You know what I mean? At
Yep.
times. Do you have any advice for families that might find themselves in that situation?
I would say
it's a tough one.
It's a tough one, and
It really is. Like, what's their first step that they could do, you know,
so
to address it?
So I always go back to trying to be proactive. So at the beginning of the year, and so if your child, depending upon what their needs are, so going back to their individual needs, if there's a need for from a safety standpoint, I guess, is what I'm looking at, that because accidents will happen, but when you have a child that maybe is behaviorally explosive, there are things that I think we can speak to in regard to keeping our child safe. On the other side of it, though, I would hope the school would recognize that a student who may be behaviorally aggressive or explosive would have a plan that would protect not only the student with a visual impairment, but all students for that matter too. So it may have something to do with, you know, maybe having the child be seated and placed away from anybody that might be I don't know how you would say that.
Physically aggressive.
Yeah,
They go in that flight mode, flight.
yeah,
mode,
that I
action.
think you could talk about, placement or not placement, but seating in a classroom and safety issues. If, being too close to the door because you'll hear sounds outside that you maybe want to have the child sitting up towards the front. I think approaching that from the idea of a safety standpoint without pointing out that it's another student. Because we as parents, I think we have to be careful. And schools are usually pretty careful too, that we're only talking about your child. And so phrasing things in a way to say, and not necessarily pointing out, but just saying in general, I want to make sure that my child is as safe as possible. And how can we be proactive in addressing that concern? So now, unless you're a parent who has had that experience where that physically aggressive student has struck out at your child, then that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, if there's been an altercation or something has occurred, that changes things dramatically. And it's no longer proactive, but reactive to a situation and how to prevent it from happening again. So every situation is so different though. Yeah, that's a tricky one too.
Well, I wanted to give you a challenge today, Cheri.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. All right, so we're going to go into communication, and that's our next section. And we do have some suggestions for parents on the divider about communication. But the couple of items that are great resources for you is that communication options for families. So this here, we showed it. It was part of that procedural safeguards. So what to do when you disagree or have questions with a decision of the school. And as it says, families and schools have a built-in partnership with the child as a focus. And that partnership, neither one of us really wanted to step into that partnership, but we're together anyway to work for the benefit of our child. So what do you do if questions arise? So it tells you, always start with the person directly involved. I've had some families that went right to the principal or the school board, and then they were frustrated when the school board sent them back down to the special ed director or back to the school. And school board members, that is the appropriate response. They should be sending families back to those people that are immediately directly involved with the situation. And we need to try to resolve those problems as close to our child as possible. We talk about what we can do in meetings. What happens if in a meeting you don't have those concerns fully resolved? That's where we talk about other problem solving steps, such as facilitated IEPs, mediation, IDEA complaints, or due process. So those are all explained in here. The links to each one of these is there. I'll take you out to the Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System. So WSEMS. I want to talk a little bit about this because our mediation system is one of 4 exemplary mediation systems in the United States. This system allows parents and educators to come to the table to discuss and mediate a specific issue with a trained mediator, a third-party person. The mediation system is absolutely free, which is really, really nice. There's contact information for our Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System. GIA is our contact. There's a 1-800 or 1888 number, toll-free voice number. And GIA is our Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System contact. So we've got IEP facilitation as well available. And what is IEP facilitation? So IEP facilitation is when families and educators sitting around the table are not listening to one another. And there might be some yelling, some anger, frustration, and it's not necessarily over a specific topic like the services or like placement or the evaluation. It's not a big topic, but rather it's the whole entire IEP meeting is just a disaster. Okay, so an IEP facilitation involves bringing in that mediator. So it's a third-party person who isn't connected to the school or to the family, comes in and helps facilitate that meeting. So instead of the teacher running the meeting, the mediator from the WSEMS, the Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System, actually facilitates the meeting and facilitates the discussion to make sure all voices are heard, to make sure everyone's being listened to, and hopefully smoothing out what has been a rough and bumpy experience up to this point. Again, IEP facilitation is free. You do have to apply for IEP facilitation. So let's see. How and when do I schedule an IEP facilitation? So we can click on that. And there is IEP facilitation should be requested at least 2 weeks before a scheduled meeting. It's probably best to do it maybe 3-4 weeks before. Our mediation system has been really busy this last year. And so contacting GIA ahead of time that IEP facilitation is needed is advisable. We have IEP or WSEMS forms. So there are mediation forms and you just click on that and you can request mediation. So the form is right here and really simple to fill out. With mediation at the bottom here, the signature of the school district administrator and the signature of the parent. I will tell you, it is quicker and easier if you reach out to the special ed administrator ahead of time and say, you know what, we disagree on the services being provided to the child. And this IEP, I want to go to mediation over this because I disagree with what the IEP team has decided. And so it cuts out some of the extra time it takes GIA to contact then the special ed director to get their signature as well. So I always recommend to families that when you fill out mediation form, have the special ed director sign it as well. The same goes for an IEP facilitation. If you can take it to the school and have it signed by them right away and submit it with both signatures, that will speed the process as well. The other thing about our mediation system, we have over 20 individual mediators throughout the state. And so both the educator as well as the parents get to choose which mediator they're going to have to come to mediate or facilitate the IEP. So it's a very, you have to both agree on the individual or it doesn't happen. Okay. All right. So
Cheri,
we
have
also,
a question.
oh, sure. Yep.
We have a question. Is it beneficial to have an attorney or advocate present to avoid any issues and ensure our child's education is met? ? If so, do you have recommendations?
Okay. So it depends. Unfortunately, I won't say that it's always beneficial. I have found that sometimes an advocate or an attorney if they speak too much, they can have a detrimental effect, if that makes sense. Okay. So I've, in the 18 plus years I've been doing this, I've heard about all sorts of experiences. I've only been in one mediation, and I went as an advocate for not only the parent, but also the school, because I had worked with the school to help them with some of their, it was transition related. So it was a student who was in high school and it was transition related. And then I had helped the parent also. And so I was there in both ways. I will say in a mediation. So in a mediation involves an even number of people sitting at the table. And so if you wanted to bring an attorney or advocate, you can expect the school district will probably bring their attorney as well. And sometimes that works really well to have them both there. Sometimes it's the attorneys doing most of the talking, and it doesn't always help the family and the educators to mend those fences. So I guess it all depends. In IEP facilitation, typically I don't see attorneys or advocates coming to those, because that has more of the let's get everybody talking. So in that case, I very rarely see advocates or attorneys coming to those types of things. Recommendations. So typically, I don't give recommendations out. I know families who have contacted in years past Disability Rights Wisconsin, because they are our statewide advocacy organization. And I will also say that in Southeastern Wisconsin, our Autism Society of Southeastern Wisconsin has a resource guide. And in that resource guide, they have attorneys listed. So typically I will recommend or I'll send the resource guide to families and say, here's a listing of attorneys that do special education law. And because I've worked with just a few attorneys over the years, and because I work for a statewide grant, I can't do recommendations. So, but I've seen attorneys in action in a variety of situations. I was on our school board for 8 years, so I had plenty of experience with attorneys representing families on all sorts of educational issues. But great question. Yeah, and unfortunately, I'll just say again, it just depends upon the situation that's being mediated, and it depends upon the personalities of the lawyers. Our mediators are pretty strong, but sometimes our lawyers want to talk over our mediators, and that's where problems I've heard have occurred.
Thank you, Cheri.
All right. The next item we have is steps to the success communicating with your child's school. This is a great resource that just helps us as family members think about our communication with the school, and it gives tips. Number one, be mindful of your emotional pressure gauge as you work with your child's school. Number two, prioritize and plan. Number three, actively listen to understand the other's perspective. Number four, clarify your statements if you see a puzzled expression on someone's face, and ask for clarification in return. So remember when I said before, if they say something, special education jargon or an acronym, ask as well. Always have options in mind and offer them as discussion as needed. That's one thing I do with parents all the time, is I know what they really want, what their plan A is, but let's do a plan B and plan C. What could you live with? Because we do a lot of strategizing. And then step 6 is just to remember we're all only human. And then there's information on the mediation system in here. Things to keep in here, again, notes and communication from school and contact information for school staff. So the one thing I really want to stress, whether you use a parent record file like this, if you do, print things off, if you get things electronically. I also encourage parents to always keep a small notebook, because inevitably we're going to have verbal conversations with school staff. And it's hard. It's difficult to remember what they said and who said what. So I've encouraged families to log their conversations with school staff. So just keeping a little notebook in there to write things down, date it, time, who you talked to, and what was said. That's a really easy tip for those of us that might not have access to a computer right away. But otherwise, the second tip is, after you've had a verbal conversation with someone, sending an email, thanking them for having the conversation with you. That's number one. And then number two, restating what your understanding of the conversation was, and asking them, if I misunderstood anything, please correct me, and send it off to them. What this does is it establishes, number one, your understanding, and it shows that, you know, communication, that sometimes things get lost in the way we interpret things and take things in. And so making sure that we've understood what the other individual has said to us is important. Number two, it allows them the opportunity to correct what they said or the understanding. And number three, and most importantly, it establishes a paper trail for you as a parent. Okay. All right. So that takes care of homeschool. So next section is evaluation reports and reports. So this is a really nice divider. This particular divider has information on the 3 types of evaluation. So you heard in the video about the initial evaluation and the timeline that is required to be followed according to the law. There is also a reevaluation process that occurs every 3 years. And parents may say, you know what, we get progress reports all the time, and I don't think my son or daughter needs to be reevaluated. You can waive it, but really have some serious conversation with school staff about what that means and when. So that, does that mean in 3 years from now, that'll be the next time we do a reevaluation? That's not the case. If things change with your child, you can always ask for an evaluation to be done in that particular area. But a reevaluation is typically taking a look at all the different areas and making sure that your child still qualifies for special education services and supports. It's especially important for a reevaluation to occur as the student is getting ready to leave high school. Oftentimes, in order to gain services in the adult world, there is a request from adult service agencies that they want to see your most recent reevaluation from the school. And so I typically have conversations with families as their child is nearing exiting school, whether it's at 18, 19, 20, or 21. We talk about, okay, at age 18, that's typically when you start you can start applying for services in the adult world. So I really look to getting an evaluation done when the student is 17 or 18, and making sure that that evaluation information is as recent as possible in order to become, in order to apply and become eligible for adult services. In this section, we have some really cool input forms for families. So family student snapshot. So before an IEP, what you'll see on the screen now is the WSPEI student snapshot.
262-781-6926.
All right, my phone just decided to call. Okay, don't know how that happened. Anyway, So the student snapshot is something you can fill out before an IEP meeting or before an evaluation that talks about your child's likes and dislikes, highlights your child's strengths in academic and extracurricular areas, hobbies and interests. We always ask questions about literacy and reading. What does your child like to read or listen to, right? When it comes to literacy. Successes and accomplishments that you are most proud of since the last time we met. Any concerns or challenges or difficulties the child may have. It's important for families to share what works at home and in the community, because sometimes the strategies we use might be able to be utilized or adapted in school as well. And then you have that consistency between home, school, and community, that the same types of strategies are being used with the student. Number 7 is my favorite. What are your hopes, dreams, and goals for your child? 1 year out and 5 years out. It's important for us to think about the future for our child. And it's important to share those hopes and dreams with school staff, okay? That's part of that relationship building, so that, and then it's not even, it's kind of cool to ask school staff what they think in a year from now or 5 years from now. What could they envision my child being able to do? That got to be a really important point as my son got to 9th grade and freshman in high school. And when we started thinking about his future in the adult world, that conversation became much more real, much more vibrant in the high school years, because there's hope there. There's future planning, and it was much more positive. And I was able to do a lot more with that than I was earlier in his school career. What skills or abilities would you like to improve? So that's linked to IEP goals. What is the best way to communicate and share resources with your family? List any other information about your child that would be beneficial. And then the last question is, does your child use any type of technology? Those types of things. So, and then you'll see there's blue, IEP disability related needs and special factors. You'll see, different words there. That identifies where in the IEP development conversation that information might be most beneficial. So we're really trying to encourage families to fill out that form and to use that form as you're having the conversation in the IEP meeting, as you're developing that IEP. We also have a new family profile. And on the screen here, the new family profile is sharing information about your family, so that remember we talked about being culturally responsive when we develop our IEPs. So really bringing forth what is our family life like, and bringing that to the forefront to help educators and other IEP team members understand what's important to our family strengths and things you are most proud of, family celebrations, what is important to us, what things reflect your culture, things like that. So that's something that can be shared as well. And then the about me is for the little ones. I love this little, it's something that I found in early childhood when I was first starting off in this job, as a way for families to be able to share things in another way, in a visual way, or in a written way about their child. So those are just some input forms. So when this is in the evaluation section, these are things that I think families can do to kind of provide that evaluation data and perspective at every IEP meeting. What to keep in here: all evaluations, any outside physician reports, and copies of consent for evaluation. Those outside physician reports, just one thing I want to mention. So it's up to you as a parent to determine whether or not you want to share physician reports. Now, some things are required to be shared in order for your child to qualify for services when I think about blind and visual impairment. But there are other types of things like with a mental health professional and things like that. And it's up to you as to whether or not you share outside provider, medical provider information with school staff, and to what degree you share that information. I will say though, keeping information back that might help school staff understand your child better might not always be in the best interest of being able to provide the best services and for school staff to have the knowledge they need in order to respond to your child appropriately. But it's up to families as to how much you want to share. All right, next section is IEP program. And just, you know, that video, Introduction to Special Education, we also have a nice little resource, a nice little booklet. And where did I put the booklet? Right here. So here's the booklet, Introduction to Special Education. And so everything you heard in that video is also in here in a printed format. So this is like the Cliff Notes version of special education. It's got some basic acronym information and phone numbers, but it basically goes through what special education is in a very short and quick version. And this is what I find most families appreciate. They don't want the down and dirty, all the details. They just want the Cliff Notes version. So this is only like 14 pages long, a nice little booklet, and it's free of charge. So this is like one of my #1 recommendations for a resource that every single family should have available to them. It gives you ideas for IEP meetings, how you write an IEP, what are special ed services, what to do after an IEP meeting. And then if you have problems, they talk about mediation, facilitated IEPs, everything we've talked about already is all in this one little booklet. Wisconsin Facets came up with a great checklist. And so you see it on the screen here. It comes in a little booklet like this. This booklet, I forgot how much it costs, but there is a cost associated with it. But if you're a parent, they're willing to send it out to you free of charge. It comes in English and Spanish. And the nice thing about this is it talks about what to do before an IEP meeting. I'm going to blow this up so you can see. So get involved, review, and they give you kind of a checklist. Now, even though they've got this checklist of things, you don't necessarily have to do everything, okay? And always make sure you respond to the invitation, any prior notice as soon as possible, get your copy for your records, those types of things, and then organize yourself before that IEP meeting. And they talk about all the different things that you should make sure that records and files should include all of the following things. And then prepare for that meeting. So think about those forms we just talked about under evaluations. You could fill out those forms, and that could be a way to help you kind of identify what has been accomplished, what has worked well, what needs more work, those types of things.
Cheri, we have a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a parent that's wondering if either one of these books that you just talked about, the special ed and this one, are in the file folder.
They would be in the file folder. Yes, most definitely. They're like, yeah, these two resources here especially, but everything that I've shared so far is all in the folder. So just know that everything you've seen here, everything is in the folder. I've just linked it all in because I thought it might be easier for people to see it online in full vision instead of me doing the Vanna White kind of thing. So is there another? Is that also in the packet you will be sending? Yeah. So if you're looking for the parent record file, we can make, yeah, this will be in there. So they talk about before and then during the IEP meeting. This thing right here, remember, you are the expert on your child. And so before the end of the meeting, they always talk about review the meeting notes for accuracy, check to see if all your concerns have been addressed. That's probably the number one reason why I hear from parents. They had an IEP meeting, they get the IEP, the written IEP, and not all the concerns have shown up, or things aren't written as they thought they would be. What do I do? Well, you contact the special ed teacher and you in writing indicate what things are missing and ask the question, how can we make sure that these are addressed? And start that conversation. Sometimes it results in another IEP meeting to talk through those types of things. Sometimes things can be done without an IEP meeting again, depending upon what hasn't been addressed, okay? So it all depends again. I hate saying that, but it really is truly, that's the way it is. There's information in here on transition planning. Just know that that's for students age 14, those students that will be turning 14 and older. And then what I recommend after the meeting, always write a thank you. Always, always, always. Whether the meeting turned out well or left you feeling yucky, there has to be something that you're thankful for. And practicing that goes a long way to helping the staff members, number one, understand you and respond to you when you do have questions and concerns. And so it does go a long way to say thank you, but there are also other tips here as well. So this is a great resource. And then I also have the CCR IEP brochure. It was developed by DPI and my grant. And that just talks about the college and career ready IEP process. So what to keep in here, annual IEPs and progress reports. Speaking of progress reports, so progress reports ought to be sent to you according to what's written in the IEP goals section. So most of the time, progress is reported when report cards are sent, but that's not true for all goals, specifically goals in regard to like behavior, sometimes may be reported more often. And so just paying attention to the goals section, and when it says how often will parents be updated on progress, pay attention to that, okay? Transition planning, for those of you that someday will have a 14-year-old or older, we have just a couple of resources in here because I know normally we have families that have younger children in this conference. And so I only included 2 items. One is a guide that talks about transition planning, and it's developed by the Department of Public Instruction. And it just tells you what a post-secondary transition plan is, a PTP, and talks about it, and then talks about some resources as well at the bottom. So that is in here. And then I also, this Wisconsin Transition Resource Guide is fabulous. So as you're preparing for your child to transition into the adult world, this resource guide talks about that whole process. It was developed by our Wisconsin Promise, which was a collaboration between DVR and DPI. And so there's a wonderful resource guide here. And I have printed copies. It says printed copies are not available. I have some at Cecil One. So just know that that will be provided to you as a resource in here, but just know in regard to transition, I know we have Dave Hyde on today, who is one of the parent liaisons for the Wisconsin Blind and Visually Impaired Center. We also have David Ballman, who does transition. And so families and educators who are on today, David's your expert in residence, David Ballman, in regard to transition planning. And he is one of the parent liaisons as well. And David Hyde would be the expert in regard to IEPs and family engagement and things like that. So I encourage you to reach out to Dave and Dave. They're my two, well, part of my group at the Wisconsin Center for Blind and Visually Impaired, of my favorite people. Trisha is part of my favorite people too. But you guys got great support and great staff there. So parents and educators that are on today, always reach out to those staff. And then finally, the last section is general information. And in this, you will receive, if you want, the parent record file, special education in plain language. So remember that little intro to special ed book? I said that was the Cliff Notes. So this is the Bible, the encyclopedia, the whatever you want to call it. It's 80 pages of special education in plain language. This is one of my favorite resources because when someone is struggling to understand what their rights are and what to expect, I turn to this. So I'm just going to turn to a page. And page 15 is, so it's set up in such a way that if you open up the book, page 15 is on your left, page 16 is on your right, and you read across 2 pages. So page 15, the IEP process, if we look at referral, what is a referral? So the law states, so that's the statutory language. And then we talk about what it means in plain language. And then you go to page 16, and we talk more about the referral, what needs to be done. So schools need to have their DPI licensed staff make a referral when they believe a child has a disability. Schools cannot refuse to accept a referral. Teachers should document what they have tried to help a child with before they refer the child for evaluation. So that's what needs to be done. And then what do parents need to know or do? And so this book kind of outlines it in plain language with every step along the way of what parents need to know or do. So this is a great resource. I love it, but it's oftentimes too much information for a lot of families. But this would be included also in the record file as well. We have information from Wisconsin Facets in here. There will be a brochure from Facets, but the other thing you'll have is their training calendar. So Wisconsin Facets is a wonderful resource for families and educators to learn through their workshops. They have webinars scheduled throughout the year, and their training calendar will be included. And you'll see every month there's a whole list of special education as well as other topics in regard to all sorts of areas, from bullying to foster grandparents program to talking about self-stigma and its impact on you. There's a whole variety of different things. So that'll be included as well, and it's linked into this presentation. And then DPI has agencies and organizations. There's a web page, and then there's a printable document too on state and federally funded family support organizations, which I linked into the presentation. So not only is there WSPEI and Facets, but Disability Rights Wisconsin, Wisconsin Family Ties, ALUS, the ARC, the Autism Society. There's a number of organizations that we can turn to for help in our state. And with that being said, we do have this in Spanish. So if anybody needs it in Spanish, I can provide it in Spanish as well. And just a couple of resources that were linked into the end, because those are our key resources. Again, the introduction to special education. And then I have a top 10 resources for families here, and that's linked in. And a lot of those resources that appear on here are the very same resources we've talked about. The only item that, or the 2 items that are different is Andrew F. Talking Points. And this is a worksheet that helps families when you're preparing for an IEP meeting. to think about, has my child made progress toward their IEP goals? And is this IEP working for them? And that is a really great worksheet to kind of help you frame out what things do you want to bring up and discuss in the IEP meeting. And then item number 8 is supported decision-making guide. So as your child is 17 turning 18, do we want to provide, do we need to consider guardianship? Does the child not need a guardian? Or do we need to do something that's more supported decision-making? So once your child is that age, that's what's in there for that. And that concludes, that concludes everything. Any questions? Any more questions? Otherwise, my contact information is on this last screen.
We don't have any questions in there yet. But I've been asking as they've been within the presentations. Thank you so much, Cheri. This is, of course, again, an amazing and brilliant session with so much useful information.